your way to Jackson County. Take different routes so you don't go over someone else's path. Lyman White and John Carrill arrived in northern Illinois, in Walker's Grove, in July of 1831, right as Morris Phelps himself was returning from having visited Sanford Porter back in Tazewell County. Well, while in Tazewell County, Morris had received a letter. It's a very famous letter in Phelps and Clark history, because this letter announced to him that there was this new religion in Kirtland that he ought to know about. Well, Morris had come from the Kirtland area, and he knew the people in the Isaac Morley settlement, and someone in this settlement, not sure who wrote the letter, but announced the restoration to Morris Phelps, which he shared with Sanford at that time. Then he came back home to northern Illinois. At the same time, almost the same day or moment, the Lyman White and John Quill are arriving in town to preach the gospel. They preached the gospel for a week or two, baptized Laura Clark. For Clark, she's the very first Clark in this dispensation to join the church, along with her husband, Morris Phelps. And Judy, we're happy to have you here. Great, we got some of Laura's descendants right here. The two daughters, Rhoda and Laura, joined the church with their husbands. They then said, go down to Tazewell County and see our friend Sanford Porter, which they did. As they left, Lyman White said, we're going to baptize Sanford Porter, and he will come back here and baptize you. In his history, Sanford says that after several weeks in being converted in Tazewell County by Lyman White and John Carrill, they did go back. They didn't go back, they went for the first time up to see Timothy. Now, unfortunately, Sanford doesn't remember the distance. It's much farther than he remembered. It's a different year. Nor did he baptize Timothy, but we'll forgive him that because he was old when he wrote his history, like all of us. Timothy may have been converted, but he was not baptized. He was baptized later in 1835 by Charles C. Rich, who, of course, was influenced originally by Sanford Porter. So it's hard to get away from each other. I think we owe the Clarks owe the Porters the vision of the gospel in its fullness, and I think the Porters owe the Clarks a little bit of the notion that the promise was in Illinois. You'll read in the Sanford history about Illinois, about him also being prompted to go there. I think it's because of some of the knowledge he had from Timothy Baldwin Clark in 1824 and 1826 based on Timothy's personal experience. Because by then he'd been there 6 years. He knew of the promise of the grass prairies of the Midwest. In fact, if you read the Porter histories, you'll read about how astounded they were by the extensive nature of these grass open prairies, because they're all used to timberland. And then, to their credit, both of them moved away from eastern Ohio, where even today you can't grow much. It's not anything to speak of agriculturally. Okay, where are we? So, Timothy is converted. Morris Phelps comes down with his wife and family. James Emmett comes down with his family, I think, from Walker's Grove. Two Alders brothers come down, and they all go together, and they chose the winter to travel to Jackson County, 1831-32. Sanford, of course, was in Jackson County in time to be persecuted. Instead of going to Clay County like most of the saints did, he went south. Does anyone remember the name of that southern we went to? No? Anybody? Anyway, he went over to what now is now Cass County. It was originally Van Buren County, where one of my ancestors was born. In the meantime, Timothy is converted in 1835, comes down and moves to western Missouri to be near his children, some of his children, the Coopers and the Phelps. So the Porters and Clarks had no interaction in Missouri. In 1839, Polly Clark died. Of course, the Saints were kicked out of Missouri, and they congregated back in Nauvoo and on the eastern shore of Iowa in Montrose area. And it's in that area where the Clarks and the Porters come back together in an adjacent situation. We know the property that Sanford Porter had. We don't know the property that Timothy had, so I don't know how close or far away he was. But they were clearly associated with each other. One more one. So, they're back together on January 1st, 1846. They're both in the Nauvoo Temple, still not finished. There's some accounts that talk about the fresh plaster and all that, and people were going through the temple. But anyway, January 1st, Sanford's there with his wife and his oldest son, my ancestor. And Timothy's there without a wife. She's gone. but has 3 of his sons there with them and their wives. January 1st, 1846. Now, what may have transpired in the ensuing months of 1846, I do not know. But that's probably the last connection the Clarks and the Porters had at that point. Because Timothy, now almost 70, decides to go back to Northern Illinois, live with his 2 non-member sons, who never had moved. And Sanford, of course, joins the Saints and came out west, and you know the rest of that history. Next. Oh, that's too bad that picture doesn't show up. I'm a Clark and a Porter. I'm happy to share this with you that the connection was formalized in this wedding, and there may be others that I don't know about. But our Don Carlos Clark was advised by his father to go check out those Porter girls in Porterville, which he did, and with some delight, I'm sure, chose Annie Eliza Porter, daughter of Alma, and Minerva Allen Duell. This is a picture of it. It's a tintype, I think, isn't it, Warren? It's like a tintype. It's a picture of them. I think, does it look like, what's that famous resort in Salt Lake? Saldair. It looks like a Saldair facsimile in the background of the photo. But there they are, happily married, I hope, but in the tradition of old-fashioned photography, are not smiling. They were sealed on November 1st, 1880 in the Endowment House, formalizing, at least for some of us, the Porter-Clark connection. I think I've got one more, too. So, I think these men both exhibited the same spirit of New England, if you want to call it that, seeking better opportunity, striving for success, being personally responsible, very accountable people, and also had and shared the same desire to know what was right from a biblical standpoint of view, and took whatever measure it was required to make sure they arrived at a position where they felt comfortable that they had the truth. And thanks to Sanford, reinforcing in Timothy that belief, and thanks to Timothy enlightening Sanford on a better opportunity than Eastern Ohio presented, they came together at a time and place that allowed them both to eventually receive the fullness of the gospel. Both of us should thank John Burrell and Lyman White, neither one of whom remained faithful in the church. But at that moment they were, and they professed the fullness of the gospel, and these families were converted. And all of us are here for that reason. Okay, one more. Well, there's 2, actually. So again, just to reinforce and emphasize and summarize, spiritual treasures were shared by one, and temporal and physical treasures were promised, I think, by another. They brought them together and had that, and created a mutually beneficial relationship that has eternal consequences. Next. So, from one Clark to another, or one Porter and one Clark to another, I say thank you, Nancy and Sanford. We have one moment for questions if you have any. That concludes the hypothesis of how I think, based on the research I did for this, how Sanford Porter and Timothy Baldwin Clark came to influence each other to our shared benefit. Anybody?
I read in a book years ago that a lot of people...
You didn't read it on the internet, did you? Okay, good. We believe it.
A lot of the pioneers living in New England would they would develop a farm and they would sell it, and then they would go west and they would clear the land and develop another farm and sell it, and they gained a little bit of wealth that way. And I wonder if it was part of that same thing, or they just know that person.
Well, Bruce mentioned the spirit of Reformation that's going on in the country. There's also this spirit of, I mean, the Northwest Ordinance in 1787 kind of opened up what you and I call the Midwest now, starting with Ohio westward. And the New Englanders were getting crowded. And then they settled Vermont, New Hampshire, and spread into New York, Pennsylvania, and on west. So it's kind of a companion idea, the spirit of adventure. One of the books, and I have a quote in the book, it says that one of the things in New England that we're always curious about it, is it greener on the other side of the mountain? I love the quote. Is there a little better place than the one I got? If you've ever been to a night in New York or Augusta, New York, or these places that Sanford called home, Berkshire, Vermont. I mean, you can't grow 20 square feet of corn if you don't cut down a couple of trees. There's no bare ground. If you've never been to New England, you won't appreciate that if your own experience is out here. And that is true up until you get to central Illinois. All ground that's being used there now has been cleared by some enterprising person seeking to clear
That
life.
was a part of Appalachian,
What was?
it's part of Appalachian soil. That whole climb aspect of the mountain that went through that area.
Ralph, I know what you're saying, but I don't know where you're referring to. What
Some
area?
of the worst soils that they have.
Where?
Appalachian.
Well, that's a pretty broad term.
North.
Okay. Well, they're pretty good soil because they grow big tall trees, but that's about all that's there, and then the soil is fairly.
Not the crops.
No, there's still no crops in Vienna in Trumbull County, to speak of. That's true. Anyone else have anything? Go ahead. President. Pardon me?
Are all those charts in your book that you kind of?
No, but the maps showing the juxtaposition and the proximity of Vienna and Liberty Township are. And I have a more extensive conversation about that in the book.
Would you be willing to share with your policy?
I am willing to do anything that will honor Ezra T. Clark. Anything else? Anybody? Testimonies, comments, suggestions, corrections? Think about this. Oh, one more, just for insight. Yeah, you can read it in here, but in those days when people were pushing outward and westward mainly, the preferred route of transportation was the Ohio River. So states like Illinois were settled from the south towards the north because of the Ohio River influence. The Mid-Atlantic states, the North New England states were pushing outward, and they came to the Ohio River, so that's an easy way to get south and west. From Trumbull County, Ohio, to Madison, Indiana, where my ancestor first floated, was 555 miles on the river. The current of the river is about 4 miles an hour. Do the math. They were on the river many days. It's 200 more miles to Evansville, Indiana. And Sanford did that in one float on a 40-foot raft, probably, on which he had all of his earthly belongings and children. In the case of my ancestor, he was also with a World War of 1812 friend who also had 6 children, so there's 16 people on this boat with their animals, their furniture, their equipment, their food, clothing, etc., for 20 or 30 days, floating down the slowly moving Ohio River. Think about that. And then he gets to Evansville, and by prior arrangement, the next spring somehow meets Timothy on the banks of the Wabash River, probably close to little places now defunct in Illinois called Elmira, Illinois. Thank you for being so courteous and attentive.
Charles. Well, he's a bit taller than me. So there's a map on the back of your program, by the way. When we're done with the breakout, you'll know where to go down to the main park for lunch. Remember, we're providing lunch, so you don't have to bring your own. But right now, we're going to have the breakout sessions. So those of you who have an interest in hearing about Mary Stevenson, you can stay right in here. And I think in a minute or two, maybe you can bring up the schedule if you still have that one. But in a minute or two, we'll raise the screen, and we're going to have Jean Brown, granddaughter or great-granddaughter of Mary Stevenson, give a presentation about her during the first half of the breakouts. But also we'll have Susan Leggett presentation by a great-great-granddaughter, Marilyn Jones, over in the main chapel, more modern chapel, if you go towards the north and over that direction. You'll find that presentation if you're interested. And thirdly, Nancy Rita Porter, a presentation by Kay Stevenson, one of our Stevenson/Porter relatives. Will be straight back to the Relief Society room. at 12 o'clock, on about a 5-minute break where we change on our breakout sessions. And those who want to hear more from Charles, but particularly about his book and research, you can come back and hear. You're going to be in the main chapel. I'll correct that. So if you want to hear about his book during the second session from about 12:05 to 12:35, go to the main chapel. And Nancy or Rita Porter will repeat again during the second session in the study room. What will happen in the second session here, and the reason we're going to raise the screen is the children will come back in here and anyone else that wants during that last breakout session in this room about the first primary. After that, after 12:35, we're going to head down to have lunch, and you're welcome to come there. Hope you'll join us. I think our treasurer Richard will be there for any money matters. Hopefully some more books there in case you need to finish up any matters there. By the way, if any of the Porter organization wants to give any donations or information, please give it to Steve Porter here, president of the Porter family organization. We kind of had 2 or 3 reunions worth of stuff here together, so I really appreciate all that's been done. And we're also going to have a microphone, I believe, over at the pavilion at the park. So there's more things that people would like to share while we're eating and visiting. You're welcome to at the microphone over there later. And you'll notice on the program there is the details about the breakout sessions as well as being over at the park and where it is. So thanks so much for coming and attending, and we'll go ahead now and break up for our breakout session.
Captured it, and it is becoming English territory. There are still some people in Gibraltar who want it to be Spain, like the Northern Californians who want to cut off part of the state and become a new state. There are some there in Spain who want to do the same thing. But most of the people who live there want to be English, and so it's going to remain an English territory. Gibraltar, there are about over 33,000 people who live there now. They speak many languages. Spanish and English are the prominent ones, but there are many, many dialects and a lot of different cultures who live there. The rock itself is a limestone structure that rises right out of the sea, about 1,500 feet. And it is lined all around its sides by guns. They point out to the sea and they point inland. On top of the rock is still a fortress, and it's manned by the English. During World War II, Gibraltar was a very strategic place in the wartime. Now, the reason she was born there was her father was a master cooper, a barrel maker, and he was put in charge of taking care of the big barrels of munitions and provisions that were stored at the rock, at this fortress, in case of an attack. They were just being prepared, like your 72-hour kit, you know. I might mention too, you may be aware that Gibraltar is the only place in Europe that has monkeys, wild monkeys, and they have no tails. Just thought I'd throw that in. 4 more children were born to the family in Gibraltar, 2 boys and 2 girls. It was Henry and Edward, and Elizabeth and Mary, the youngest, who was born in 1825. So now there are 6 children. When Mary was less than 2 years old, her father took the family to America. They sailed on the ship Canning of Kingston, and they spent more than 60 days on the ocean, May until July. Now, can you imagine taking 6 children anywhere in a confined space? They are on a ship with 6 children, ages 2 to 14. That must have been a real challenge. Conditions varied from ship to ship. Most of the ships were cargo ships.
This just is a sample of something she might have done. The little lace and the little embroidery. She had yards and yards of muslin on this wagon train trip. And she embroidered, these are not hers, but they're just, of the era. And she embroidered all kinds of baby clothes for the children that she thought that she might have. And so as they were in the wagon train driving across, they had an encounter with the Indians. And this Indian chief looked at her, beautiful, tall, brown hair, brown eyes. He wanted her. And he offered 5 ponies. Well, the person in charge of the wagon train distracted him, and he left to get the ponies, and for the next 3 days they hid Susan in a wagon. Nothing ever became of that. When she got to Salt Lake City, took in September, there was a bulletin in the newspaper, you all know this story, that of all the immigrants that had arrived in Salt Lake City, and her name was listed. And Ezra, it had been 8 years since he saw her as a 16-year-old girl in England as a missionary, because he boarded at her parents' home. And he said to his wife, Mary, he said, oh, that Susan Leggett has arrived with the immigrants. And she said, you better go put on your best clothes and go right to Salt Lake and pick her up. And he did. And he brought her home. This was September, and in November they were married, and she became his second wife. And they lived in the Stevenson home, which is right here, Ezra's home, the Stevensons. And I think it took about 5 years or so until they built her home. This is the Susan Leggett home. And it's such a beautiful story about how well they got along. They got along really well, and all of the children were treated as equal and were in both places. And she was also a beautiful singer, as we mentioned, in England. Ezra Thompson Clark really liked the finer things of life, and he liked a good meal, and he would invite. Now you join in if I'm wrong or if you have anything, because I'm a novice. And he would, Laura, nobody here is from Laura, which is this line right down here. She has a special testimony of how her father would come in and encourage her cooking, see if she needed anything, and help her. And so then after they'd have a big meal, they would go in the parlor and they would have a testimony. And Ezra would always bear testimony of that he was promised his children would be of nobility. So then he said, that's grandchildren, all of us, kind of nobility, noble people, and just what noble people meant. And then Susan would sing. He would always have her sing. And crossing the plains, she would sing. She also, on Sundays when they didn't travel, they'd have music, and she was a beautiful singer. And so she would sing. She had 10 children. She had 6 boys and 4 girls. And all of you know the story about John Alexander. He was teaching in Minersville, and he was an excellent teacher. He taught with his sister, Alice. I don't know if I had Alice, maybe it's Susan Alice. They kind of both taught at the same school. And he wanted to go on a mission. And everyone was trying to persuade him to stay a teacher. And he said, I would be willing to give up all of my inheritance just to serve a mission, to be able to serve a mission. So he went on the mission, and he studied Arabic, and he stopped in England on his way. Some of the letters he wrote back to his mother, these are all pictures of Susan, and letters he wrote back to her was thanking her for her graciousness. She had a tidy, fit as a fiddle home, because she just was on the ball with sewing. As soon as she married into this family, she started sewing pants and dresses and suits. An elderly man, in some of the readings, said she sewed a suit for him that was the first suit he had ever owned. And so she used her talents of sewing and her talents of singing, and she starched her clothes with her children. They were always well dressed, and her home was very orderly and very immaculate. And anyway, he wrote back thanking her. I think he stopped in England on his way to Turkey, on his way with the mission, the details of his mission. But he died in Haifa, as you know, with smallpox. And what was that? I have on the back of one of those pictures. He died in February of 1895, and President Wilford Woodward, who was the prophet, received a letter not until March. And they were informed, like in March, that their son had died. He received a letter from the mission president that he had died. And of course, Susan immediately wrote to the mission president wanting to know all the details. They buried everything with him because of the smallpox, black smallpox or something like that.
I heard it was typhus.
You know, all the documents I have, and, you know, and the diseases then and now might be different, but it was black smallpox. I don't know, could be, but that's the I don't know how accurate, and so I'm subject to correction. Anyway, and that's so he and all of you know that are on the Mary Stevenson. She also, her oldest son died coming home from his mission. So these two
Ezra
moms,
James.
wives had something in common, you know, with their missionary sons that had passed away. And I've got kind of an interesting story. Annie Clark Tanner married Joseph Marion Tanner. And Joseph Marion, to avoid all the polygamy contention, they were being in prison underground, la-di-da, he went on a mission. And he went to the same place he did before he was there. And he actually baptized, there was a German colony, and he actually baptized several in this German colony, and then they later migrated to Provo. And I found that out because my youngest son, I have 10 children, he married a girl from Cary, Idaho, and her grandfather's children said she was baptized by Joseph Marion Tanner in Haifa. And so I thought that was kind of a little personal interconnection there that was kind of an interesting thing. And then he came after Joseph Marion Tanner had been there. And then Annie Clark, which is my line, had 10 children. It's been misprinted in several things that I've seen today. Obert Tanner was her youngest, and he was the first one to visit the grave. And you know who Obert Tanner is, the jeweler, whatever. Anyway, so this is the Susan Leggett home today. I think it was painted white later, but that's how it was there. And I don't know, and then this is her gravesite tombstone right here, if you've seen it at Farmington Cemetery. It's got a picture of her and John A., which is John Alexander, and his date of birth. And her oldest son, then she had a baby named Marion that died after a year. Her oldest and first child, which was Seymour, he actually had an act, Seymour Thompson. He was born, so their very first child was born a year after this building, this old church was dedicated. And he had some kind of an injury, and he was never right ever since. He died at age 30, but he never married. I don't know any details about that oldest son and how that came down. Here's a picture of their family, which there weren't any in the foyer. A little bit of that, Mary Stevenson, Susan Leggett brothers. No, I'm just kidding. This is actually John Alexander right here. When I went on the internet, it clicked their names on there, and I haven't taken the time. All 10 of her children are not here, and this is a daughter. She had 1, 2, 3, 4 daughters. This is Annie Clark, and she had 6 sons. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure where the other 2 are at this time.
Is that picture online?
They died very young.
You know, one died as a baby. You were right.
3 of them all together. The 21 kids, 3 of them were very young.
Well, one died after 1 year, and the other one died at age 30, but it seemed like he could have been in this picture. It is on the Clark organization. This picture is there, and their names pop up, so that you know who they are. And I just have learned so much about this wonderful woman, and her commitment to the gospel, and raising her children, and being strong. Well, her mother and her father and all of her siblings came to America. They saved their money. In Antone's book, he expresses the sacrifice of probably Ezra in helping finance all of them coming. In some other things I read, she sounded like her father sacrificed and saved. He was the last to come. She also had her mother's sister, who was an aunt, came over and stayed. She came at age 76, and she lived with Susan in her home. And she took care of her for about 4 years and maybe 10 years, and then she died. Her father died at age 94. Her mother lived with her for about 10 years and passed away. She took care of her mother and her father and this elderly aunt, which in those days was probably very difficult. They don't have the equipment that we had for that type of thing. And then she went on a trip to Salt Lake in a carriage, and it rained and stormed, and she wasn't properly covered. When she came home, she got ill and she died the next day, age 64, younger than me. It kind of brings it right to her, you know what I mean? And so, and her last words she spoke were, Ezra, you would come for me. I knew you would. And he died just the year before, in 1901. She died in 1902. And that really touches my heart about polygamy and how beautiful it can be. Because I think they all really loved each other and got along. And it's so much better than what you read in this book.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and I have read this book long ago, and I pondered about her and her youngest son, Obert, who's my father's uncle. And I felt like she kind of lost her testimony toward the end of the book. I just kind of felt like she wasn't so strong in that direction, you know. And I asked, I think Antoine, he was the president of the Clark Family Organization, what made them, Annie's family, so not falling away? I think there's only two, the only ones, there aren't very many that are active in my life. And he felt like it was intellectuals. You know, because Joseph Marion was a teacher. He also was the president of Utah State University, which was a land-grant college, a federal college. When the government found out a polygamist was the president of that college, he was dismissed from that position. And so, oh, and I see Brother Steed here. Great, he's on this line right here. Susan Alice Steed. Do you have any questions? What I'd really like for you to do is tell me something about your line. Do you know what I mean? Or somebody about, I don't know a whole lot about these people. I don't know why there's so many under Nathan George. I think there were 2 wives, but I don't know a whole lot about that. Does anybody here? I have a few notes. Nathan George served a mission in England, and some of the information we know about Susan was her letters to him. And she said she first met Nathan George Clark's father on Fanning Street in England, because he was on a mission there and was for her childhood days. Am I getting too confused? You're following? And then I know Horace Wells Clark served the mission in California, and Susan Alice Bell taught with John Alexander. They taught school together. Well, can you tell us anything about her? What do you know?
She was my grandma.
Your grandma. Who was her? Who do you come through? Which one of her children?
Through Joseph.
Joseph? Oh, Thomas Joseph. Thomas Joseph. Okay. Okay.
And she did teach with John.
With John Alexander. Thank you.
In Minorville.
In Minorville.
And they got along famously.
What a good find.
There was evidence that when she came to the family,
I'm trying to remember.
Mary had to change.
There's so many names.
1867. And it's crazy.
This is true.
First, I'm going to tell you about the Rock Church. I don't know, you probably know a lot, but Farmington was first named North Cottonwood because of the big cottonwood trees that they came in to Farmington. Like down the road, there were lots of cottonwood trees. And the first church they went to was a log schoolhouse down by the river. And then they went to the courthouse, up at the top of the courthouse for church. And okay, enjoy your lunch.
1816, this famous year of no summer, led them both to decide to leave Ohio. Their crops were failing. In the words of an Oliver Lewis son, who later in life recorded the event, the country smelled that stank with an awful odor because of crop failure. So in 1816, in November, after having been a very active education and class leader, Timothy and his 6 children and his wife and all of his belongings and possessions got on board a 40 or 50 foot raft called a Broadhorn, and with Lewis, this is the second Lewis and Clark expedition, with Lewis, his friend from the war, and his 6 children and wife, floated down the Ohio River for 555 miles, or 559, depending on which map you use. I think it took them 20 or 30 days to do so. Interesting, the young Lewis boy records that as the family marched down to the riverbank to board the Broadhorn, the raft,